A plan not to shrink the economy, but to stimulate it. The question is not what can be cut, but what can be created. I do not suggest that this can be done without pain. It can't. But you have to know what it is you want to achieve. Do you want to reboot the economy, protect jobs and restore growth, or do you want to focus solely on one component of the problem, the public finances, and in so doing risk a downward spiral of cuts and economic contraction? The recovery plan should be based on what I call the 3 C's: confidence among consumers, credibility among investors, and competitiveness on world markets. To say that consumer confidence is low is an understatement. It would be more accurate to say that consumers are petrified. The ESRI Consumer Confidence Indicator has fallen to historic lows and retail sales are collapsing. The latest figures from the CSO, which relate to November, report the largest annual fall in retail sales since April 1975. A survey of retailers, published in the Sunday Business Post at the weekend, suggests a fall of 10% in the fourth quarter of 2008 compared with the same quarter of 2007. This indicates a significant rise in the savings rate consequent on a loss of confidence. Many people have lost their jobs, but a lot of people haven't. They just aren't spending money. Now, government can act to restore confidence by addressing fear head-on. The one thing that people fear more than losing their job is losing their home, and it would allay much of the fear among consumers if there was a guarantee that for the duration of the recession, no one will lose their home. We must also look at the VAT situation. The flood of consumers over the border cannot be ignored. Equally, falling prices are likely to result in consumers postponing their spending. A temporary VAT cut would effectively boost incomes, but it would also help to shift the growing expectation of falling prices. There has been a similar shift in sentiment among the buyers of Irish government bonds. The benchmark measure, the yield on 10-year paper compared to German bonds, or the Bund spread, has widened dramatically in recent weeks. Germany borrows 10-year money at 3.2%, Ireland at 5.6%. Clearly, there are strong fundamentals driving that market, but the rising rates are also the result of incompetence and inaction. So far, the government has made 5 major policy shifts on Anglo-Irish Bank. On each occasion, the other banks were the subject of unwelcome attention from the financial markets. It can't even get its story straight as to what happened on the night of the guarantee. We're also suffering the effects of a failure to set out a credible fiscal strategy for the next 5 years. The Labour Party has been calling for a medium-term approach to the fiscal and economic crisis for months. The Stability Pact update, published in January, is not a plan, it's an accounting exercise. The third component is competitiveness. We all know that Ireland must begin to wean its economy off reliance on construction and get back to the business of selling goods and services to the rest of the world. Our competitiveness was badly eroded during the property boom, and the problem has been made worse by the fall in the value of sterling. It is a source of deep concern, therefore, to read reports that the government is contemplating cuts in capital spending. Ireland has serious infrastructural deficits that must be remedied. Looking back over the past decade, it is frankly unbelievable that the deficiencies in key infrastructure such as broadband could not have been dealt with in the best of times. It was hard not to agree with a person I met recently who summed up the achievements of this government as a broken bank, 2 trams that don't meet, and a spike in O'Connell Street. For some months now, the Labour Party has been advancing concrete proposals to stimulate economic recovery and create jobs. Our approach has been similar to that proposed by the European Commission in November. Public investment should promote short-term stimulus and long-term competitiveness. We have brought forward a series of concrete ideas and proposals. We have argued repeatedly, for example, for additional investment in building projects such as schools and urban regeneration. The skills involved in building schools are similar to those involved in building houses. We've also argued that the government should provide incentives to kickstart what could be a €25 billion industry insulating homes and in refurbishing dwellings. That theme is also reflected by the Commission stimulus plan, which calls for investment in carbon reduction and green-collar industries. Now, some of these proposals have, in theory, been taken on board by the Government, and it's flattering to hear the Taoiseach repeating them here again today. But what we need to see is action. We have also repeatedly called for innovative thinking in the field of education and training. We know that about 500,000 people need to upgrade their skills. Now is the time to do it. We need fresh, innovative thinking on how that can be achieved. Labour has suggested, for example, an earn and learn scheme. If a company is faced with reducing its workforce, why not move to having people working for part of the week and learning for the rest of it? That is a far better solution than just having people join the dole queue. This is an emergency, so we can't get hung up on the rule book. We have to think afresh. There is currently a cap on the number of places in further education, which stops further education colleges from responding themselves to the needs that they see, and there's also a cap on the VTOS courses. Taoiseach referred today to 30,000 places that are going to be available in higher and further education. But he hasn't made it clear as to whether that's the existing 30,000 or whether it's an additional 30,000. If it's just the existing, then that needs to be expanded so that people who are coming out of employment will get the opportunity of re-entering the education system and of upskilling. Now is a time to invest in our people, who are the core of our competitiveness. What answer does the Government have, for example, to the thousands of young people who will graduate from college this year? Will they be faced in a few years with the old story of the 1980s? Can't get a job without experience, and you can't get experience without a job. Rather than pay people to do nothing, can we come up with a work experience or job placement scheme? There is work to do in our country. This is a generation brimming with talent, energy and creativity, who are willing to give service to their country and to their community. What is needed is the imagination and the energy to put their talents to good use. For any recovery plan to work, however, it must be fair. It must be clear that the burden is being shared across society and not just being borne by any one group. And here again, trust is vital. It is hard to see how a government that presided over a frenzy of greed among property developers can now ask for sacrifice from others with a straight face. It has been suggested, for example, that a cut in public sector pay will have a demonstration effect for private sector pay and hence boost competitiveness. What that argument amounts to is a call for a simulated devaluation in our real exchange rate.
1 minute remains.
But it is a simulated devaluation that places the burden only on one section of society. We are told that workers should take a pay cut, but if they do, will the fees charged for a GP visit fall too, or health insurance bills, or will other interests in our society take a similar hit? I have no doubt that we will see lengthy talks going on in government buildings in the coming days, and we can be fairly confident that an agreement will emerge. We know that when called on, the social partners will seek to do their part, even if some of those social partners insist on using the opportunity to beat old ideological drums. This is not a game of deal or no deal. What matters is what is actually in the deal. And so far, all the indications from government is that the overriding objective of the talks is to cut public expenditure. Do I have time after the SUS?
Yes, my understanding is that Labour and then he would have the remainder of the...
Here, look, it would be plenty of precedent if the House agrees to sit for another 5 minutes.
Well, except that my understanding is that the chair doesn't have that flexibility. But I'm being.
The House has. The House has.
Well, the advice that I'm getting is that I don't.
The advice is over there.
The teacher gets agreed.
I hope this doesn't definitely cause a constitutional crisis, but I'll accept it not. The Taoiseach is allowing me to do that.
Well, if it does, if it does, and we're both sent anywhere in retribution, we'll share a cell.
Thank you. Deputy, I'm told I must have the agreement of the House, which I'm presuming I have. So please continue.
I want to say again that the way to deal with the public finance crisis is to get the economy moving again. That is not to say that we can ignore the state of the public finances. We can't. What matters now is not the deficit this year or in any one year. What matters is whether we have a credible plan to address the problem over a period of years. We do have to send a signal that we are serious about putting our affairs in order. But that has to be done in a fair way. Those who have most should contribute most. And let's be honest about it. Let's be upfront with people. Let's call a tax a tax. This government will do anything to avoid using the word tax. They have levies, user charges, contributions, all of which are taxes by another name. It is clear that there is a requirement to broaden the tax base. The wide range of reliefs and exemptions that grew up in the last 10 years must now be rigorously pruned and curtailed to ensure that the wealthy pay a fair share. That means a re-examination of the tax breaks for interest on rental properties. It means dealing with the loophole in respect of directors' pension schemes. It means looking afresh at the rules pertaining to tax exiles. An Irish passport should bring responsibilities as well as rights. To get the economy moving again, we also need a different approach to the banking crisis. Firstly, we need rigour, discipline and consistency from government ministers, and that has been lacking. Secondly, we must look to the credibility of the banking system, and that means in reality major changes in the personnel across the guaranteed banks. And it means sending a clear message to investors across the world that Ireland is making a fresh start in its banks, that wrongdoing will be exposed and illegality punished. What has gone on in Anglo-Irish Bank cannot be brushed under the carpet. There has to be full accountability to restore confidence, credibility and Ireland's reputation. And while we may not have wished to own a bank, we do now. So let's set that bank to work, to draw down the money available from the European Investment Bank to lend to small businesses who are currently starved of credit. The world around us is changing very rapidly. Certainly our present difficulties owe a lot to the mistakes made by government and to their lack of urgency in addressing the crisis. But we also, I think, have to realise that we are witnessing a major crisis in the structure of globalised capitalism. And there is no certainty that we will return to the system as it existed before the credit crunch and the collapse of Lehman's. There were fundamental imbalances and injustices in that system which were always going to be unsustainable. In a recent article, Professor Joseph Stiglitz makes the point that the lifestyle of the developed world was in fact being financed by borrowing from the developing world. Subprime mortgages were financed by the trade surplus of countries such as China and were the flip side of the US trade deficit. The subprime crisis was also driven by inequality in the US, where people in the lowest income bracket had not seen a real increase in incomes since the 1980s. Stiglitz makes the point that, and I quote from him, "A few years ago, there was worry about the risk of a disorderly unwinding of global imbalances. The current crisis can be viewed as part of that, but little is being done about the underlying problems that gave rise to these imbalances. We need not just temporary stimuli, we need long-term solutions." It was never supportable or sustainable that the US would have a carbon footprint of 20 tonnes per person while China's was 3.8, or that the average carbon emission for high-income countries was 13 tonnes compared to less than 1 tonne in low-income countries. Nor is it supportable that 1 billion people live on less than $1 a day, or that the richest 500 people in the world between them earn more than the 416 million poorest. That 2 senior bankers could earn more in a year than Malawi spends on its health service, or that the CEOs of the top 15 US companies earn 520 times the wage of the average American worker. That kind of structure was never sustainable and it was never right. Globalisation has brought billions of people into the global trading system. That can be a major benefit to humanity, but we need a world that is constructed on a sustainable and just manner. These are not just academic considerations. The question we must ask ourselves is this: what will the new global order be, and what will Ireland's place be in it? We were, and still can be, one of the richest countries in the world. But what will that world look like? What industries will grow and what will contract? Where should Ireland position itself in the new global order? In all of this, the EU has a vital role to play. For a brief moment last year, we saw Europe assume leadership role in world affairs. That has faded. partly as the natural consequence of the change of president in the US, but also because of reluctance among some countries about pushing ahead with the EU stimulus package. A recovery plan based on confidence, credibility and competitiveness has a good prospect of success. It should be fair and be seen to be fair. It should be focused on stimulating the economy and not on shrinking it. It should follow the logic set out by the European Commission of using public investment to deliver short-term stimulus and long-term competitiveness. It should seek to create jobs and to train and educate people for new jobs. While this is a profound crisis, it is also an opportunity to re-gear our economy, to provide the schools our children deserve, to make our economy more sustainable and to create a new sense of fairness and solidarity. What is happening in the economy is very frightening for some people. People are losing savings, jobs and businesses. They know that these are difficult times and that there is more to come. But they also need to be certain that the solutions put forward by those who represent them and who govern them will help them to weather the storm. They need to know that there is as much talk of security as there is of sacrifice. We can get through this. There will be an end to the recession, and the solutions to this economic crisis need to reassure our fellow citizens, our young people, that they will still be standing when the economy recovers, standing and ready to contribute to a society that values fairness and the common good over self-interest and greed, ready to grow an economy that is competitive and sustainable and fair.